Welcome to the AviAssist focus sessions. The AviAssist Foundation has been promoting aviation safety for over a quarter of a century, since 1995. In our focus sessions, we inform, inspire and entertain African aviation safety. And we talk about things that are crucial if we want to raise the bar, continue raising the bar on safety in Africa. And we introduce you to inspiring safety professionals. Today we're talking about aircraft leasing and safety. We're also continuing with our popular prize draw. In this draw you have a chance to win $100 in each episode. Entering the draw is also one of the certification criteria if you want to qualify for a certificate of attendance. The other criteria are that you have to watch 100% of each session and that you score 70% or higher on the end assessment that will become available after this broadcast. But it will only be available for 48 hours after the broadcast, which is why we encourage people to watch the live broadcast. The prize draw does two things for us. The first is that the game will give you some insight into what inspires my guests here at the table today. What stories, what books appeal to the table guests. And the second, of course, is very simple. It gives you a chance to win $100 in cash that you can spend on whatever you want. You'll see a web address at the bottom of the screen. At that page you can submit the 3 letters that I'll give you throughout the broadcast and that together form a 3-letter code. Every 10 minutes or so we'll show you one of the favorite books of a guest here at the table. And all you have to do is write down the first letter of the first name of the author. You'll end up with a 3-letter code. You enter those 3 letters on the Google form page and then don't forget to click submit. And you can only submit your 3-letter code until 15 minutes after the end of this focus session. From amongst the correct answers we'll draw one lucky winner and send that person her or his $100 by mobile money. And we'll announce the winner on our LinkedIn page, so that's an extra good reason to follow us on LinkedIn. Now before we go to our discussions here at the table and look at aircraft leasing, for those of you who maybe don't know much about AviAssist, allow us to introduce ourselves with this short video.
Africa, a continent on the rise. Africa is the world's second biggest air transport growth market, and there is a lot to do. Africa is in the process of giving the continental aviation industry a place on the world map, on all fronts. This requires unprecedented efforts, even more so in a post-COVID-19 recovery. It means eliminating a backlog, but also respecting sustainability and CO2 emissions, building safety on the ground and in the air with technical and operational training. More than ever, international cooperation is vital to give what is arguably the most important economic link between Africa and the rest of the world, connecting people across the vast distances in Africa. An essential link, and that's why there is AviAssist. Africa and AviAssist. We have been leading, building and supporting safety promotion for the African aviation industry since 1995. Affordable, independent and professional. We stand up for aviation safety in Africa. We change attitudes and produce safety. Our professionals support African professionals, and we do it with passion by delivering on-site and online courses across Africa and more. AviAssist. Join us in Kigali or anywhere else on the continent. The African aviation industry needs you right now, more than ever. AviAssist.
That's us. Passion for safety in African aviation since 1995, powered by volunteers. Now, I'm joined at the table by 3 guests from across the industry to help us understand leasing and safety. We'll look at how safety oversight is regulated of leased aircraft. The distinction between state of the operator and state of registration has faded because of leasing. What role can aircraft leasing play to facilitate the growth of African aviation? Richard Jacobs is Chief Commercial Officer of aircraft leasing company True North that specializes in leasing out regional aircraft. Richard, welcome to the studio.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great to have you here.
Nice of you to ask me.
We'll also want to give you a little bit of insight into how independent airworthiness and safety experts assist both aircraft leasing companies and those airlines leasing aircraft in ensuring that the market value of the aircraft is maintained, how safety is ensured. Ted van Zundert from independent advisory firm SGI Aviation will help us understand how technical consulting and advisory services in the areas of aircraft and engine asset management helps sustain safe operations. Karibu Ted, welcome to the studio.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to be here.
And Karibu is Kiswahili for welcome in this particular case for the viewers out in East Africa. And aircraft leasing also has a major legal component. Funding and leasing agreements require the involvement of lawyers. We are joined here today by Nana Agiman Abu Bonsra, who also represents the next generation aviation professionals. Nana is a qualified lawyer and a member of the Ghana Bar Association. And he has worked in civil and criminal litigation. Aviation was born in him more recently, and he's now broadening his horizons into the aviation industry, studying air and space law in the Netherlands at Leiden University, and has developed a keen interest in aircraft leasing and finance. Nana, you represent this next generation of aviation professionals. We're here to feed to you on the topics of leasing because it's a relatively new thing, but also to hear your views as to how you see this expertise, these challenges, legal challenges, land in the younger generation that you represent.
Definitely.
So great to have you here in the studio as well.
Thank you for having me.
I don't know the word to say welcome in Ewe?
No, in Chi. Akwaba.
Akwaba, okay. Akwaba to the studio. Gentlemen, welcome. With your expertise and experience, we'll focus on how to make sure aircraft leasing is done safely. Richard, let me start with you, perhaps. I don't want to get into an academic discussion about the exact terminology as we lawyers would like it, what is aircraft leasing? But if you have to describe, maybe to a new professional in the aviation industry, what aircraft leasing is, what would you say to her or him?
It's simply renting an airplane. As far as we are concerned, that's what we do is dry leasing.
Yeah.
And that's just in plain simple English, renting an airplane rather than buying an airplane. So it saves you a lot of capital because if you would have to buy an airplane, even with a bank loan, you'd be spending 30% of the value of that airplane in capital. So it saves a lot of capital. It allows airlines to grow and to grow fast without huge capital injections. And that's basically what dry leasing is. We provide a service where we basically take that 30% investment, but at the same time ensure the banks that the asset is well taken care of.
Okay, and if I maybe can take it to Ted. I mean, we hear Richard speak about dry leasing. Is there also wet leasing, I presume, then, or?
Yeah, wet leasing can be an option as well. Wet leasing is when an airline leases the aircraft with crew, insurance and maintenance. So it's a turnkey solution to another airline. So yeah, that's a business as well. It guarantees safety as well because, for example, if a European operator flies a wet lease in Africa, the standard is towards EASA. So the
European Aviation Safety Agency, yeah?
Yes, thank you. And the bar is then set at that level. I think in recent years, of course, the African safety increased very much, and it got to a good level.
So there's less need, perhaps you mean, for those foreign entities to play a role in that respect, sometimes.
Yeah, well, wet leasing can be used in different scenarios. It can be used for short term when there's a capacity need due to back-to-back maintenance requirements from the airline that needs assistance. Or it can be, sometimes it's used for route development, where, let's say, an old Boeing operator wants to try out new routes, rents in via a wet lease smaller aircraft to
build up those,
to develop the route,
yeah,
and take over at one point. So the different solutions can be.
Okay, so wet lease, dry lease are two of the main distinctions you like, if you like, in terms of renting aircraft.
Yeah, where dry leasing is usually much more long-term. If you dry lease a brand new airplane, it will be for a period of, let's say, between 8 and 12 years, usually. Whereas a wet lease contract can be as short as 3 months. And there's various categories in between, up until charters, where basically the wet lease company is paying for the fuel and for and uses its own flight number. So there's various categories there. In the United States, it's called CPA, Capacity Purchase Agreement.
Okay, get too technical on us.
Yeah, those are more long-term contracts, and it allows U.S. airlines to have a much more planning horizon, which is one of the reasons why ACMI, Aircraft Crew Maintenance and Insurance, that's the common name for wet lease. Why that is, why those companies are so much stronger in the United States than they are in Europe or anywhere else for that matter. They have a much longer term planning horizon.
Okay.
They can rely on customers, and they don't rely on a single customer.
So let me take this to Nana on the other side of the same table, actually. In terms of what we've also done an episode once about aviation insurance, and there we saw that what the aviation insurance brokers found very difficult, the European-based aviation insurance, is to find expertise in Africa that could help them build up a good case for aviation insurance. You are entering the domain of aviation safety because you were not one of those children who said, I always want to be a pilot, right?
No, not at all.
So how did aviation enter in your life?
Well, so back home when I was practicing as a private legal attorney, I had to do a transaction for one of the domestic airlines which had gone defunct, and we're looking for new investors for the domestic airline. They had outstanding issues with the regulator.
In terms of safety.
Exactly, and they also had issues with some of their lessors because they hadn't maintained these aircraft very well, and there were debts, and there was a whole lot of things. And I think because there's not a lot of specialization in aviation in terms of the legal practice, what happened was that they could also not afford the lawyers they were used to from the UK. So they had to come to a local law firm. So we had to learn aviation on the job.
Yeah, from
and
scratch.
In the process, I found out that there was quite a lot of opportunity in aviation. So I just started looking out for prospects and to maybe diversify from the litigation into something more specific.
And for non-legal people, litigation means court cases.
Court cases, going to court and, doing all the court rounds. And that's how I ended up in aviation. So it was between McGill and Leiden, and then I decided to go to Leiden.
McGill is in Canada, right?
McGill is in Canada, Montreal. Yeah, they also ran a very good program, just as Leiden University does. And that's how I actually got into aviation, so to speak, and it's been good so far.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, at least you started the right way. Feet in the mud.
Exactly.
You've seen the ugly face first, and then start.
Still decided to go.
Definitely. And I think it's also one of the things where I think you mentioned earlier that looking for the right expertise in different places, because you don't know where your aircraft is going to be and who you can rely on to give that support to
take care of the asset. Yeah.
Definitely.
Is that something you recognize from the work in Africa, Richard? Where you see this challenge of, like I said, with the aviation insurance brokers who come to us and say, we find it difficult if we want somebody locally to represent us who properly understands what aircraft leasing is, how these things work. Do you come across that, or?
Well, first of all, when you engage in a more difficult jurisdiction, you will start looking for Plan B or Plan C even.
Jurisdiction being a country, basically.
A country, basically. Especially when the legal environment is such that it holds risks. You will be looking for ways to extract your airplane if the situation comes to that.
So in case somebody doesn't pay the bill, so to say, that you can then say, okay, after a certain time it has to come back, the aircraft has to come back to us.
Yeah, and the records are good, and you can actually use the airplane for another lessee outside the country that it's currently registered in. So you can transition that airplane easily, which means the technical documentation, which is as important as the physical airplane itself. is all in good order and allows you to extract the airplane. When it comes to local manpower, yes, we will be looking for the local law firms, because you need local advice even when you start the lease, which means you have an established contact when it comes to technical, operational. The value of an airplane is such that you can always fly it in. So if need be, you fly a team in that gets you the airplane out. And actually in the repossession cases, and I've done a few in my career, that's basically what happens.
Repossession means, as a lessor, you take the aircraft back into...
Yeah, and that can be voluntary. I mean, it can be an agreement where both parties agree that it's actually not working, the airline is not going to make it. They hand you back the airplane and they voluntarily cooperate, or in the case that Nana described, it's not voluntary. And you have to go the legal route, and you have to enforce your rights as a lessor, which you always have in that particular country. And that is something that you will be looking for, that we will be studying very carefully before we even start the lease.
But then you particularly need local legal expertise, ideally, that can help you advise on what the regime in the country is. Not the political regime, but the legal regime. I have to go to the first book, because otherwise the viewers out there in Africa will think, where is my chance to win $100? So each of the guests at the table has taken a book to the table. This is actually a book in Dutch, but I think the original is in a different language. It's written by E.M. Remarque. So what's important for you out there is the first letter of the first name. So in this case, the echo, as we say in aviation. I think, Richard, you are the one who took this to the studio?
I did, yeah.
Briefly, what does it mean to you? Why is it important to you?
It's a book that has had a great impact on me. Erich Maria Remarque was the writer. He was a participant in the First World War, drawn into it as a teenager, still, as somebody who had just left high school. In the enthusiasm stirred up by the older generation, he joined the First World War thinking that it would be over by Christmas. Well, we all know how that ended, with a complete society turned upside down, not in one, but in all of the participants of that war.
And but why has it inspired you? Why is it
Well, I fished the book out of a garbage can, actually, so that it shows a little bit. But I was 17 when I took it out of the garbage can, which is just the same age as the person. The book has been made into a movie twice, even recently. It's a very raw movie that doesn't do justice to the book itself. But what impressed me most was that the guy, 17 years old, realized that he was, because of his war experiences, unfit for society going forwards, because of all the things he had done, all the people that he had killed, and the participation in the war. And history repeats itself. If we look at what's happening in the eastern parts of Europe nowadays, we are breeding another generation of remarks.
Of people who don't know what to do with life
afterwards because of what they've done.
Fascinating story. Thanks so much for taking this book to the studio and giving the people out there a chance to get this first letter, the echo. Ted, we were speaking just now of this importance of Richard mentioned the importance of making sure that the aircraft is in a good condition when it gets returned, equally when it gets sent out, I'm sure. But what does a firm like yours, it doesn't have to be yours, other brands are available, but what's the role that a third party like yourselves play in that, for example?
Well, we can play a role as extra eyes on the ground, whereby we, as a third party, have an independent review of the asset, in what state it is.
The asset being the aircraft or the engine?
The aircraft, the engine, also the technical records. Technical records nowadays are almost more important than the metal itself, because it needs to be on paper correct, also of course in physical condition. So we can be an extra set of eyes that are independent, so they can be used by the asset owner.
That would be, for example, Ted's company.
Richard's company, and they can use that then again, towards the banks. as a third-party independent review.
We've said it a couple of times now that documentation is so important, but aviation is an extremely regulated industry, which
I'm sure
inherently, yeah, but it's further than the legal documentation concerning a lease or a purchase. But the aviation authorities, they make sure that if something goes wrong on an airplane halfway across the world, they're able to trace it back to the raw material from which that particular component is made. And
to the aluminium or whatever it is?
To the batch of aluminium that was used to produce that single piece. And that is extremely expensive, but it is the kind of safety level that you basically only find in nuclear reactors. Really? And the medical industry has over the past few years also adopted these kind of policies. But that's why the documentation is so important.
So you can trace back
to birth traceability, as we call it.
But also obviously the maintenance on the way, right? It's not just, you don't just go back to the very origin of an aircraft, but you also keep track of, have the maintenance checks been done, etc.
Everything that has been done, the person who's done it has a personal stamp, the dirty fingerprint, we call it, of the maintenance that is done. Yeah, maybe Ted has a stamp.
No.
But that is all documented and is all traceable. So every action that is taken on an airplane is traceable to the person who did it.
That's pretty impressive. That's part of the secret of the safety of our industry, whether it's leased aircraft or not, but that same traceability of all the things.
That's uniform, yeah. Whether it's owned or leased, doesn't matter. It's the aviation authority that enforces it.
The Civil Aviation Authority of a country, of Ghana, for example. Yeah. And actually, in another episode, Nana, we spoke about that as well, about the safety oversight role, and you told this story how in Ghana that has really changed over the last 10, 15 years. Can you maybe enlighten?
Yes, so I think when in a more, smaller perspective of just Ghana and not maybe Africa, because when Ghana used to run a national carrier, which was Ghana Airways, there was a lot more, let me say, enthusiasm about aviation.
Yes.
And then,
because
unfortunately,
people could see it.
Exactly. Yeah. And unfortunately, Ghana Airways was liquidated. Now, between that period and recent times, you'd realize that aviation took a dip, issues of safety. So at a point, Ghana was even blacklisted on the EU and in America. And so it
blacklisted meant that the operated aircraft from that country could not fly into European
because
airspace.
They were unable to meet basic safety standards. We didn't have the right legislation even in place to ensure that we were keeping in touch with standardized safety measures. So, but with over a period of, let's say, 5 to 6 years now, Ghana has moved at some point in 2019 to even top ICAO's audit of safety in the whole of Africa, which clearly shows that there's that commitment to ensure that there's a certain level of safety is maintained in Ghana, for instance. And if you were to tie that in with leasing, and just as Richard said, if the CA in Ghana, and that would be the Civil Aviation Authority, has a responsibility to ensure that they have the right standards to be able to tell this aircraft coming into Ghana operated.
To sort of support that traceability of maintenance.
Exactly, and all of that. So it always comes back to also the manpower, the people involved in the process. Richard, Ted will do their work, but where the aircraft is operated, are the people there do they have the right requisite skills to be able to, do all the checks with safety and all of that? I think
safety
becomes very important, and it all ties into like the entire ecosystem of aviation and leasing and safety. Yeah.
And I can imagine, Richard, that it's sometimes confusing because you might think as a layman, if you come into the domain of aviation or into the domain of leasing, that you have an aircraft which may have the registration, the call sign, the number plate, if you like, of Ireland, perhaps, for example, which is a very common home for aircraft leasing company, but it's being operated in a totally different regime. How does that work? The difference between basically the state of the registration and operator.
Well, it's a state of registry that keeps the oversight of the proper maintenance of that aircraft, which means that if the airplane is operated in Ghana or in Nigeria on an Irish register. That means the Irish authorities are responsible for oversight.
So how does it work in practice then? Because I can't imagine Ireland sending inspectors to...
Yes, they are.
They do? Okay.
Yeah, they, for years, I mean, it's become a bit less common, simply because a lot of the national airworthiness authorities do not want those kind of operations. They're called 83 bis operations after the article in the Montreal Convention. Those kind of operations are cumbersome for the airline that has to fly those airplanes, not on their own registry. But it's cumbersome also for the state of registry, who has to actually send people over on a regular basis to check the airplane and audit the maintenance procedures. So it's
and the maintenance organization that performs the maintenance perhaps in that country, for example.
That's something that can be independent. I mean, in a leasing contract, for instance, you can stipulate that the airplane for base checks, for let's say the heavier checks, we call them also C checks or D checks, is being sent to a facility that has an EASA or an FAA or both.
So a European or a US designation.
Part 145 capability.
There are a few of those, I think, in Africa. I think, amongst others, I can think of Ethiopia that has many EASA certifications. So partially, some of that maintenance could then be done by an African-approved maintenance organization that has this European.
Any foreign maintenance organization can apply for an EASA accreditation, a Part 145 approval, and is then authorized to sign off under EASA rules. Those foreign accreditations are registered, so you can see who is allowed to do it. But generally, lessors will ask you, a lessee, to send an airline for the heavier checks to such a facility that has that accreditation. So at least in the base checks, it is being maintained by an organization outside, or let's say with an approval that allows the airplane to allows that check to be recognized by other authorities outside the country.
Okay.
Otherwise, you'd have to redo that maintenance upon redelivery, which is a waste of money.
And Tom, if I could just ask Richard, maybe he mentioned 83 bis. And I think he made a point about not being the most preferred option. Convenient. I mean, for someone like me, while studying the program, we read about it. But in practice, whereby, let's say, the aircraft is registered in Ireland and it's being operated in Ghana, an 83 bis agreement could well be that Ireland will still hold onto the responsibility of issuing the airworthiness certificate and allow for maintenance and other things to be done, let's say, in an accredited institution in Ghana. Is that the understanding of how 83 bis works?
That's how 83 bis works, and the main reason for lessors to do it is actually not a safety argument, mostly. It's a repossession argument. Repossession is what we just discussed, the forcible
somebody doesn't pay the bills,
involuntary return of the airplane because the bills aren't paid. And in some countries that can be quite cumbersome. Another reason could be tax. If you put an aircraft on the register in Paraguay, for instance, you'll be paying import tax. If it's a temporary registration, if you leave it outside the country, registered outside the country, that could be treated differently. So we look at tax reasons, we look at legal reasons, risks, basically. Both authorities, both of the state of registry and the state of the operator, have to cooperate and also have to have a bilateral agreement in place for that kind of operation.
And you speak of cooperation between those two entities involved, the state of operator and the state of registration. Ted, if I come to you, if you think, I don't know if you have operational experience with the company you are currently in Africa, but are there particular challenges? Because AviAssist always tries to look for solutions, basically. Are there particular challenges you've seen and solutions you could see around the horizon to make life for the aviation industry and for companies like yourselves easier?
I think what you said earlier as well is like maybe a clearer registries of qualified people in countries could help. I think what is also important to mention is like you have all these conventions around, and one of them also regarding repossessions is the Cape Town Convention. So it's and there are countries who signed the Cape Town Convention, and there's an example now out there. It's not an African country, but there was a repossession in Vietnam, whereby Vietnam originally respected the Cape Town Convention. Now a leasing platform wants to extract their aircraft, and they're basically being blocked by the government. What is against the Cape Town Convention that they signed. So they got a warning on that as well.
It's interesting, you seem to be almost military style with the extraction of aircraft, basically taking the aircraft. But so the Cape Town Convention, don't want to go into too much detail. We might have to do a different episode about that, but it basically helps to facilitate leasing and finance of aircraft. So the idea is to make it easier with the Cape Town Convention, that was the idea. Yeah. But it's then not always observed, as you say.
Yeah, and there's you will only find it out once you're in the process. You do hope that you did your homework in advance and
with the help of
with,
like in the future.
So you hope to have selected the right jurisdiction to lease your aircraft to. Then sometimes things go wrong, and you need to take them back. And then on top, if you then have a country that does not respect these treaties, then
that poses a risk for.
Yes,
but there's other ways to attain the same goal. I mean, it doesn't have to be because an 83 bis operation is quite cumbersome. But there's other ways to achieve a similar, if not the same, effect on safety, and that is. We call it a shadow CAMO. CAMO is Continued Airworthiness Maintenance Organization. It's a common thing in Europe. It's actually an EASA
European
terminology.
Safety, yeah.
But even in a blacklisted country, if the airplane is registered in a blacklisted country, you could, as a workaround, ensure that there is a CAMO organization, a European CAMO organization or accredited organization, is keeping track of the technical documentation of the aircraft, and if that happens,
supporting the maintenance organization in the country, perhaps.
And making sure that the European regulation is being satisfied while the aircraft is maintained, so that if the airplane ever comes out of the blacklisted country, it is not treated as such, but is treated as a European registered
as a good aircraft, ready to go back to.
It's less cumbersome for the airline. It's costly because a CAMO organization is a commercial organization, and TED's organization SCI is doing those kind of services as well. It's not cheap,
but it would be
but it is a better solution, or at least it's a less cumbersome solution for the airline to do it this way, and it's being done I know in various places.
I have to break the discussion for a moment with the next book for the viewers out there, and a chance to win this $100. I don't know if it's related to aircraft leasing or not, but the title is Merchant of Death, which is not a good thing in this context, I think, to mention. But the author is Douglas Vara, so it's the D, the delta that you need as the second letter on your Google form. Don't forget to fill the letter and then click Submit. Very briefly, Ted, I think this was your book.
It's my book, or not my book.
Why did you bring it? What is special about it for you?
Well, it has to do with aviation. It's about an arms dealer, Victor Bout, and when the Soviet Union collapsed. So Victor Bout is a translator in the Soviet regime. Then it collapses. He's in Sharjah, Dubai. A translator, so speaks many languages. There are Russian aircraft there, and they were from the government, and then they're his now. And he starts an arms deal, trafficking between Europe.
With those aircraft
into Africa, but also flying for the United Nations World Food Program. It's a interesting book.
So it's a very good. It keeps your attention basically if you sit in the.
It keeps the
like
attention.
A thriller almost.
Yeah, there's a movie of it with Nicolas Cage. I think Lord of War it's called.
Oh, okay.
So that's the book.
Thank you very much for taking this book and giving some insight into what makes you tick, Ted van Zundert, who likes arms dealers, and but also particularly likes safety, I think.
A lot of warlike books from this end of the table. I hope you have something more peaceful.
We'll come to you in a moment.
I think, but even I think with the storyline, there's a similar situation which has to do with safety in aviation, and I think in the thesis of Jeffrey Huang, he used to be a technical director at ICAO.
Okay.
His PhD, in one of the chapters, he talks about the lax supervision, the oversight safety supervision of countries that take on the registration of aircraft but don't have the means to be able to actually carry out the oversight responsibility.
As it's supposed to be.
And I think in the 2000s in Liberia, when they had their civil war, it was a similar situation where aircraft that had been registered in Liberia were being used to transport arms. So when Ted mentioned it, it came to mind as like, yeah, it comes back to this whole safety thing that you may be the state of registry, but you may not have
the capability
to do the oversight. To do the oversight safety. Yeah.
Well, of course, the people watching and the goal of AviAssist is to be a catalyst in those safety improvements. The majority of work has to be done by Africa itself, by Nana, by the viewers there.
Definitely.
But as AviAssist, we try to help building that capability, which is also why we are here today at the table. Indeed, one thing I want to take your attention to as well. I'm not sure if Richard is the best person or Ted. Is the role of airworthiness directives or service bulletins? They relate to maintenance, right? What role do they play in this chain of traceability?
Well, the service bulletin is a document that is issued by the manufacturer of a part of the entire airplane. So it can be an engine airworthiness. It can be an engine service bulletin. It can be an APU service bulletin, or
APU being the auxiliary power unit.
Auxiliary power unit. Or on the aircraft itself. Those service bulletins come in different categories. Optional, which is nice to have, so to speak. You can choose
as an operator or as an owner to implement it.
It could be just for operational enhancement or convenience, passenger comfort. The other category is recommended. So the manufacturer recommends, from a safety point of view, that the modification is adopted. And in that category of recommended, there is always the certifying authority of the airplane, which in the case of Airbus would be EASA. In the case of an Embraer, that would be Brazil. Is always having a look at those recommended service bulletins and taking a view on whether it should be the subject of an airworthiness directive. The airworthiness directive is issued by initially by the state of certification.
So the state where the aircraft is built and certified, basically,
yes. Designed. But is adopted or not, but mostly it is adopted by the states that have validated that type certificate.
Okay.
And the validation is basically similar as with a car. It's a type approval to operate that type of aircraft in this country. So an airworthiness directive can have any nationality. Where the airplane is registered, and each country has its own airworthiness directive, and it's basically a mandate. It's you have to comply with this and this service bulletin before such and such date or within so many flight hours.
Yeah. So that is also something you would then check in your role if you would be in between the lessor and the lessee, whether those service bulletins and those, particularly the airworthiness directives, I understand, have been actually implemented.
That would be can be part of the role and the job or the exercise that's on the table. Absolutely.
And I think because the company you work with, which it also does, because you focus on regional aircraft, isn't it?
Yes.
As True North, you have customers in Africa as well.
We have 3 customers in Africa: Ethiopian Airlines, Samair in South Africa, and Airlink also in South Africa.
So then you have to set up this whole constellation that we basically spoke about this afternoon of ensuring that this traceability, ensuring the implementation of those airworthiness directives and possibly service bulletins to make sure that it stays safe while it operates in Ethiopia, for example, but also when it comes back.
We are exactly. Lessors are all about asset protection. So making sure that the asset has a decent value and can be reused after this lease. We are not ensuring that an operator complies. We will during a lease audit, look into the books and see whether we see anything missing there. But it's the airworthiness authority that ensures, and that is imperative to the connection between lessors and safety. We are not the enforcers of air safety. That is the responsibility of the airworthiness authority.
Which normally is the civil aviation authority of a country, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. And we will follow that. So if we are not convinced that procedures or the oversight, the airworthiness oversight of an individual country is very good, we either adopt measures like described before with the CAMO administration, or we don't go in at all. So it's more an indirect way that leasing may influence safety is by voting with their feet, basically.
Yeah, they will just leave. Yeah. Is leasing, because you described it very easily as renting of aircraft, basically, is leasing actually popular? Is there a lot of leasing going on in aviation?
There is a lot of leasing going on, more than most people think. 50% of the fleet is not owned by the airline, but by a leasing company. So
half of the aircraft we see in the sky, basically,
are owned by a leasing company.
Are owned by leasing companies. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And do you see, because Africa, currently, and the generations that Nana will keep serving in the next 40 years or so, there's a big growth projected for African aviation. Do you see leasing as providing opportunity to realize that growth? Ted, I think you spoke before about the wet leases that will be used to develop routes. Mm-hmm. Do you see a big role for leasing that growth for Africa? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. As Richard says, 50%, I think in certain market segments, it's even higher. It's more than 50% is leased aircraft. Back to the beginning, it's the capital cost of the aircraft that is just it's very high.
Basically, the cost of buying an aircraft.
Yeah. So as well for the African market that is projected to grow. Leasing is a affordable solution that airlines can finance their growth easier by leasing aircraft than buying aircraft. Because if you purchase an aircraft, it costs you a lot of cash. And you can basically lease more aircraft than that you can buy. And spread out the cost, basically, as an operator. Time for the last book. I can hear you're itching, but let me first go through your book, actually, because I have to be wary of the time for the viewers out there. Your third letter is coming up. It's a book called In the Chest of a Woman, Efo Kojo Mawube. Yeah. And the first letter, that's the only letter that's important for you out there, is the echo, the E. So that'll be your third letter on the form. Again, don't forget to click submit, otherwise it won't work. Nana, why this book, briefly?
So basically this book talks about a certain culture back home which is oppressing women and not allowing them to take leadership roles. So it's scripted around my ethnic group, which is the Akan ethnic group, where women are not allowed to become chiefs or kings. Okay. And so in this particular case, the setup is such that the lady, she was due to take over from her father, but because she was a woman, she couldn't. So she gave birth, and unfortunately for her, in that sense, it was a girl. Okay. But she raised her as a boy and told the entire village that it was a boy. And it was time for this boy to take over the reins, but she had to get married. And also give birth, and it became an issue. So the bottom line is that I'm an ally of feminism, and I believe that women empowerment is quite important. And this book gives a very vivid depiction of how the rules we make for ourselves as people, especially in Africa, it's by us. And when the time comes for us to change it, when we see it's not really a progressive norm or rule, we should be able to do that. So that's basically why. And it was a book that I had to read in my literature class, I think, in high school. Okay. Yeah. I think it's very important also. I'm grateful for you to take this book, because
we try as AviAssist also to play our small role in getting more diversity in aviation, because there is a lot of people like us in suits, and most of them are men actually. So I think it's very interesting. Maybe next time when we do a leasing session, we should have at least one lady at the table.
Yeah.
So if I could ask each of you, just give some thought to one last thing, because we're approaching the end of today's episode. One last thing that you could give to the viewers out there in terms of this is how you think leasing currently or could benefit aviation safety, because in the end AviAssist is all about safety. Some people might think renting of aircraft and this whole stuff, it comes from Ireland, it's complicated, the safety is not looked well after, perhaps that's what people might think. What would be the one thing that you would like to demystify in that respect? You want to start out, or is it?
Okay, but I think my takeaway, or what I would say, is I'll pick from what Richard said before when he mentioned the fact that if, let's say, a lessor is not, or a leasing company is not comfortable with the regulatory agency in a particular country, they will not even allow their aircraft to go there. What it means is that business is being taken away from, opportunities have been taken away from these African countries. So then for countries like Ghana and other African countries that are trying to put themselves out there, you then have to keep up with international best practices, so that even if it's for the local or the domestic airlines, they're able to go into the market to get aircraft from places like TrueNord so that it can be operated, let's say, in Ghana. So I think it's very important that in the area of safety, the role of the regulator in African countries plays a big role in the business decision of companies such as TrueNord, and I think that's
and the economic opportunities for those countries.
You basically should view it as we are putting capital at risk in the country of the operator, which basically makes us kind of an investor into the country. I mean, if you have a $20 million airplane, I mean, just to mention a sum. And 30% is financed by the leasing company or by the airline. That's $6 million per airplane. If you want to build a fleet of 10 airplanes, which is not an uncommon size for a regional airline, that would require a $60 million investment in the aircraft alone, and that is dead capital. It's not doing anything in principle. So it's a huge investment, and if you want to grow, and Africa will grow and will grow quickly, that means there is a huge expenditure. I mean, Europe and the United States each have 3,000 regional aircraft, and that's excluding narrow body. So anything from 140 seats and above is excluded in that. 3,000 airplanes is what the US has. Regional airplanes is what the US has on its register. Same in Europe. If you want to have some scale in Africa, that requires so much money that the governments are almost forced to establish that infrastructure and build the infrastructure that you are working on with the empowering young people to become a part of. That is so essential for actually the development of the country itself.
Ted, I'll come to you in a moment for one suggestion, Rich as well, on how to improve it.
I can only join what Nana said, I think, and that's if countries in Africa will do themselves a big favor if they invest in the safety bar and get that up,
safety oversight,
and that will bring in the leasing companies that will get them over the line.
And of course, I mean, let's not beat around the bush. Companies that you represent have a financial interest in that as well, of course, because that's what you make your living. But at the same time, I think to enable that growth in African aviation, we need these flexible solutions which leasing offers. Continuous strengthening of the point you were making, Nana. Richard, one last gem you want people to remember out there in terms of leasing?
Well, an old lessor hobby horse, if you will, when it comes to developing nations, is and it's tied to the infrastructure and the safety oversight. Get rid of the age restrictions. They have nothing to do with airworthiness or safety.
Briefly, age restrictions, what does it mean? That you don't allow an aircraft on your register that's older than 10 years or whatever, 10 years. So you think that's not a good thing for safety?
No, it's a sign of weakness. I think it's a sign that the airworthiness authorities can't cope with the maintenance that is tied to older airplanes. You see now that the oldest airplanes are actually flying in Europe or in the United States or in Australia.
Because what you're basically saying, it doesn't necessarily mean if it's an old aircraft that it's an unsafe aircraft. On the contrary, if it's well maintained, that's the point you're making.
Just as safe as a brand new airplane. There's just less oversight needed on a brand new airplane because, well, there's newness initially. And that's why a lot of airlines are forced to operate newer airplanes than they actually should be, because capital costs are, for an average regional airline, it's about a third of their total cost. If you have to do that with brand new airplanes, it's going to increase further. If you want to become profitable and develop your airline, you need to start with older airplanes.
Very interesting, because indeed quite often people out there, including myself, would have thought, well, a new aircraft, that's brilliant, good for safety. But basically you're saying what is more important is good maintenance, good record keeping, and then it doesn't really matter if you do that properly how old the aircraft is to a certain extent.
It's one of the reasons why a ticket in Africa is more expensive than in Europe.
Thank you very much. That's a very nice last point to end with. I'm afraid we're coming towards the end of today's show. Thank you very much, all of three of you, for joining me here in the focus sessions today, for the benefit, I hope, of making aircraft leasing a little easier to understand. We might have to do another episode, I think. Then to you, lovely viewers out there, from Rwanda to South Africa, to Botswana to Nigeria, and including your country of birth, Ghana. Yes, we have viewers from there as well. Thank you for tuning in for Safety Promotion. If you enjoyed today's focus session, please be our ambassador and tell all your friends and colleagues and future aviators about the work of AviAssist. If you want to associate your company with the work of AviAssist and take your safety beyond just regulatory compliance, consider becoming a corporate friend of AviAssist. You can do that in our web shop, www.aviassist.org/shop, and your support will go a long way, also in supporting your reputation. If you want to continue free learning with AviAssist, visit our YouTube page, where you can watch our previous focus sessions in your own time. You will have to join us in live broadcasts to qualify for a certificate of attendance. I think from there all I can say is join us again on the 25th of October. On that day we'll have a focus session that is all about how we can recruit and retain next generation aviation professionals. Come and visit us at our first AviAssist Safety Promotion Center, the ASPC Rwanda. Lots of exciting courses coming up in that same month of October at our center at the University of Rwanda. We'll be bringing you a 4-day airlaw course in Kigali, a peer support course for pilots and cabin crew to support mental health, a safety management systems course, and an airport obstacle limitation course, and probably some more courses as well. And please don't forget, only you can target safety. Join us for the next focus session as we continue our mission with you to improve African aviation safety. Same time, same frequency. For now, we say Nashukuru to our Kiswahili viewers and have a good day to the rest of you. Bye-bye.